He thought one joke would humiliate her, but that single shot would dismantle everything he believed about skill and superiority. The late afternoon sun stretched long across the outdoor shooting range just outside Austin, Texas, casting sharp golden lines over polished benches and neatly aligned targets set at 25 yards, 50 yards, and beyond, the air dry and humming with quiet confidence from the men who gathered there every weekend to prove something to each other that no one had asked for. Jake Carter stood at the center of it all, arms crossed over a fitted black shirt, mirrored sunglasses reflecting the world like he owned it, his voice carrying just enough to be heard without trying. The kind of man who didn't just expect attention but assumed it. And around him, a tight circle of regulars laughed easily, their gear expensive, their posture practiced, their eyes always scanning for the next opportunity to establish dominance in subtle, socially acceptable ways. They called themselves competitors, enthusiasts, professionals, but beneath it all was something simpler, a quiet hunger to be the best in a room that never stopped measuring. And then she walked in. Claire Bennett didn't belong in their world, at least not at first glance, wearing a faded denim jacket over a plain white shirt, her jeans practical, her sneakers worn from real use rather than style, her presence so understated it almost slipped past unnoticed except for the way silence briefly touched the edges of the space as a few heads turned, not out of curiosity, but judgment. She moved calmly, signing in at the front desk, her voice soft, her posture relaxed, as if the weight of being watched didn't exist for her at all. Jake noticed immediately, not because she stood out, but because she didn't try to, and in a place built on ego, that alone was enough to mark her as different. He tilted his head slightly, a smirk forming before he even spoke, already scripting the moment in his mind, already deciding what role she would play in his afternoon. "You lost, ma'am," he called out casually, his tone light but edged, the kind of comment designed to sound harmless while landing exactly where it was meant to. A few of the men chuckled, subtle at first, then louder when she turned toward him without hesitation, her eyes steady, her expression unreadable, not offended, not impressed, simply present. "No," she replied, her voice even, almost quiet enough to be missed if the room hadn't been listening for it. "I'm exactly where I'm meant to be." That answer didn't fit the script, and for a fraction of a second, something flickered across Jake's face before confidence snapped back into place, stronger, sharper, fueled now by the need to reassert control. He stepped forward slightly, gesturing toward the lanes with an easy grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Well then," he said, louder now, inviting the room into the moment. "Let's see what you've got. We don't usually get beginners out here this late." The word beginners hung in the air like a label already assigned, and the laughter that followed was warmer this time, more comfortable, because now everyone understood the role she was supposed to play. Claire didn't react the way they expected. No nervous smile, no defensive explanation, no attempt to prove anything with words. She simply looked past them for a moment, toward the targets stretching out into the distance, the breeze barely shifting the paper edges, the quiet hum of the range settling into something almost still, and then back at Jake, her eyes steady in a way that didn't challenge him, but didn't yield either. And in that stillness, something shifted, so subtle it went unnoticed by everyone except the one person who should have paid attention. Because Jake Carter had just made his decision, and without realizing it, he had chosen the worst possible person to turn into a joke. The laughter lingered longer than it should have, stretching across the range like an echo that refused to fade, and Jake leaned into it, sensing the attention shifting fully in his direction as he picked up a sleek, well-maintained pistol from the bench beside him, handling it with the kind of casual familiarity that came from years of repetition and just enough confidence to make it look effortless, even though every movement was calculated for effect. He glanced back at Claire, tilting the firearm slightly as if presenting it, not as a tool, but as a test she had no business accepting. "You ever handled one of these before?" he asked, his tone dipped in mock curiosity, already anticipating the answer he wanted to hear, already preparing the follow-up joke that would land even harder in front of his audience. A few of the men shifted closer, their boots scraping lightly against the concrete, forming a loose semicircle as if they had done this before, as if there was an unspoken routine to moments like this where someone new became the center of attention for all the wrong reasons. Claire stepped forward without hesitation, closing the distance between them with the same calm rhythm she had carried since she walked in, her gaze briefly dropping to the firearm, not with awe or uncertainty, but with quiet recognition, the kind that did not announce itself. "I have," she said simply, her voice steady, offering nothing more, nothing less. That answer again, not fitting the narrative, not giving Jake the reaction he needed to keep control of the moment. He let out a short laugh, louder this time, turning slightly so the others could see his expression. "Well, that is something," he replied, stretching the words just enough to draw another round of chuckles, his fingers tapping lightly against the grip before setting the pistol down on the bench between them. "Tell you what," he continued, gesturing toward the nearest lane, the target set clean at 50 yards, its center untouched, waiting. "Why do you not take a shot? Just one. We will keep it simple." The way he said simple carried weight, not encouragement, but expectation, a quiet assumption that whatever happened next would reinforce everything they already believed. Someone behind him muttered something under their breath, a comment about beginners and luck, and a few others nodded, their attention sharpening as phones subtly appeared in hands, angled just enough to capture what they assumed would be a harmless moment of embarrassment. Claire's eyes moved past Jake again, settling briefly on the target downrange, the paper barely shifting in the faint breeze, the distance clear, measurable, ordinary to anyone who understood it, and then she reached for the pistol. Her movements were unhurried, precise without being performative, fingers wrapping around the grip with a natural alignment that did not need adjustment, her stance settling into place as if her body remembered something her words had never claimed. Jake noticed that, though he did not say it, a small crease forming between his brows before he quickly masked it with another smirk, crossing his arms again as he stepped back just enough to give her space while still controlling the frame. "Take your time," he said, though there was an edge beneath it now, a subtle shift from amusement to something more watchful. Around them, the noise softened, not fully silent, but quieter, conversations fading into low murmurs as attention narrowed toward the single moment about to unfold, the air holding a tension that had not been there before, the kind that appears when something unexpected begins to take shape. Claire did not rush. She adjusted her footing by an inch, her shoulders relaxing, her breathing slow and measured, the world around her dimming in importance as her focus narrowed downrange. And for the first time since she arrived, the range did not feel like Jake's stage anymore. It felt like something else entirely, something older, something earned, and though no one could have explained why, a subtle unease began to ripple through the group, because deep down, beneath the laughter and the assumptions, there was a growing sense that they might have misunderstood exactly who they were dealing with. The world narrowed to a single line stretching from her steady gaze to the paper target 50 yards away, and everything else seemed to fall away in quiet layers, the murmurs fading, the shifting feet settling, even the breeze softening as if the air itself was waiting to see what would happen next. Claire's finger rested along the frame, not yet on the trigger, her breathing slow and even, the kind of rhythm that could not be faked, and for a brief moment, something flickered behind her eyes, not hesitation, but memory, distant and controlled, like a skill stored away rather than forgotten. Years earlier, long before quiet routines and simple clothes, there had been early mornings under open skies, the sound of instruction carried across fields, the discipline of repetition measured not in minutes, but in thousands of precise, deliberate actions, each one building something that never truly left, no matter how deeply it was buried beneath an ordinary life. She did not think about it now, not directly, but her body remembered, her posture aligning naturally, her grip adjusting by fractions that no one else would have noticed, her shoulders settling into a position that spoke of experience rather than imitation. Behind her, Jake shifted his weight, arms still crossed, though the casual confidence in his stance had begun to tighten at the edges, his eyes narrowing slightly as he watched more closely now, not for entertainment, but for confirmation that his earlier judgment still held true. He told himself it did, that this was just another beginner trying to look composed, that whatever happened next would still fall neatly into place. But the longer she stood there without rushing, without overthinking, the more that certainty began to feel less solid than it had a moment ago. A phone lifted slightly in the background, someone preparing to capture the outcome, a quiet snicker slipping out before being quickly stifled, as if even they were beginning to sense that something about this moment did not match the usual pattern. Claire exhaled slowly, her finger moving with quiet intention, not hurried, not dramatic, simply precise. And in that instant, the range held its breath. The sound that followed was sharp but contained, echoing briefly before dissolving into the open air, and then there was nothing, no immediate reaction, no laughter, no comment, just a stillness that settled heavier than before. Jake's eyes moved instinctively downrange, his confidence expecting to confirm what he already believed, but as his gaze locked onto the target, something in his expression shifted, not dramatically, but enough, a subtle fracture in the certainty that had carried him all afternoon. The center of the target told a different story, one that did not leave room for explanation or dismissal, one that did not align with the assumptions made just moments earlier, and for the first time, Jake Carter did not have a ready response. Around him, the group leaned forward almost in unison, their earlier amusement replaced by quiet confusion, eyes narrowing, heads tilting, each of them trying to reconcile what they were seeing with what they thought they understood. Claire did not turn immediately, did not look for approval or reaction. She simply lowered the firearm with the same calm control she had shown from the beginning, placing it back on the bench without a word, her expression unchanged, as if the outcome had never been in question to begin with. And in that silence, thicker now, heavier, something unmistakable settled over the range. Not just surprise, but the quiet realization that the story they had been so sure of had just slipped completely out of their control. No one spoke at first, and that silence carried more weight than any reaction ever could, stretching across the range as if even the air needed a moment to adjust to what had just happened. Jake did not move immediately, his eyes still fixed downrange, his mind working faster than his expression could keep up, searching for an explanation that would restore the balance he was used to controlling, but the evidence sat there in plain sight, clean, undeniable, refusing to bend to his expectations. One of the men behind him let out a quiet breath, almost a whisper, and another leaned forward slightly, as if a different angle might change what they were seeing, but it did not, and the longer they looked, the more the truth settled in, steady and uncomfortable. Jake finally straightened, rolling his shoulders back as if resetting himself, the faint smirk returning, though it no longer carried the same ease as before. "Nice shot," he said, his voice measured, attempting to reclaim the tone of casual authority, as if what had just happened could be filed away as coincidence, as if the moment could be reduced to something ordinary. A few of the others nodded quickly, eager to follow his lead, to return to familiar ground. "Beginner's luck," someone added, a little too quickly, the words landing with less confidence than they intended. Claire turned slightly then, not fully facing them, just enough to acknowledge the sound of his voice, her expression unchanged, calm in a way that did not invite agreement or argument. "Maybe," she replied, her tone even, giving him nothing to push against. That unsettled him more than if she had argued, more than if she had smiled or taken pride in it, because there was no angle to regain control, no opening to turn the moment back in his favor. He stepped closer to the bench, picking up the pistol again, his movements sharper now, more deliberate, as if he needed to demonstrate something, to remind the room, and himself, where the line was supposed to be. "One shot does not prove anything," he said, louder this time, his voice reaching the edges of the group, pulling their attention back toward him, toward something familiar. He gestured downrange again, this time toward a smaller target set farther out, closer to 75 yards. The paper circle barely more than a distant mark against the backdrop. "Let's make it interesting," he added, the edge in his tone returning, though now it carried something else beneath it, something tighter, more urgent. The group shifted again, drawn back into the rhythm they understood, a challenge, a test, a way to re-establish order. Claire glanced toward the new target, her eyes tracing the distance briefly, the faint movement of air, the subtle shift in light as the sun dipped lower, and for a moment, nothing about her changed, no hesitation, no visible calculation, just the same quiet presence that had been there from the start. Jake extended the pistol toward her again, this time not as a joke, but as a challenge he needed her to accept, because without it, the moment would remain unresolved, and that was something he could not allow. "Go ahead," he said, his voice steadier now, though the tension in it was clear if anyone had been paying close enough attention. "Let us see if you can do it twice." The room stilled again, not with anticipation of embarrassment this time, but with something far less comfortable, a quiet curiosity that edged into uncertainty, because the first shot had already broken something, and deep down, they all understood that if she did it again, there would be no easy way to explain it away, no simple label to restore what had just been lost. The offer did not sound like a joke anymore, and everyone in the semicircle felt it, even if no one said it out loud, because the tone had shifted from amusement to something sharper, something that carried the quiet weight of a man trying to take back control of a moment that had slipped too far from his grasp. Claire looked at the extended pistol for a brief second, then back toward the distant target, now smaller, farther, less forgiving, its center barely visible against the fading light, and yet nothing in her expression suggested doubt or calculation, only the same steady presence that had unsettled them from the beginning. She reached for the firearm again, her movements identical to before, unhurried, precise, as if repetition itself was part of something deeply ingrained rather than recently learned, and that alone made a few of the men shift their stance unconsciously, their earlier confidence replaced with a quiet alertness they could not quite explain. Jake watched closely this time, no longer leaning back, no longer performing for the group, his attention locked on every detail, the way her hands settled, the way her shoulders aligned, the way her breathing slowed without effort, and somewhere beneath his surface confidence, a realization began to form, unwelcome and persistent, that this was not luck, that what he was seeing did not belong to someone out of place. 75 yards, he said, almost as a reminder to himself as much as to her, his voice lower now, stripped of its earlier edge, as if naming the distance might re-establish some sense of control. No one laughed this time. No one added commentary. The range had grown quiet in a way that felt different from before, not empty, but focused, every eye fixed on the same point, waiting, not for entertainment, but for confirmation of something they were beginning to suspect. Claire adjusted her footing slightly, just an inch, the subtle shift of weight that aligned everything from her stance to her sight line, her finger resting along the frame once more before moving with deliberate calm, and for a moment, the entire scene felt suspended, like the pause before a storm that never needed to announce itself. The sound came again, sharp but controlled, echoing briefly before dissolving into the open air, and then, just like before, there was nothing, no immediate reaction, no exhale, no movement. Only that same heavy silence settling over the range, as if everyone understood that whatever they saw next would not be easy to explain away. Jake's gaze snapped downrange faster this time, urgency replacing certainty, and the moment his eyes found the target, his expression changed in a way he could not mask, the faint confidence he had been holding onto slipping completely, replaced by something far more difficult to hide, recognition. Behind him, someone whispered under their breath, not a joke this time, not a dismissal, just a quiet, involuntary reaction to what they were seeing, and another step closer without realizing it, drawn in by the undeniable precision that now spoke louder than anything that had been said all afternoon. 2 shots, 2 results, both clean, both exact, both leaving no room for coincidence, and suddenly, the story they had been so comfortable telling themselves no longer fit. Claire lowered the firearm once more, placing it back on the bench with the same controlled ease, her expression unchanged, her breathing steady, as if nothing unusual had happened at all, as if this had always been the expected outcome. Jake did not speak immediately this time, his mind racing through explanations that no longer held together, his role in the moment shifting in a way he had never experienced before, from the one who defined the narrative to the one trying to understand it. And in that silence, deeper now, more complete, the truth settled in without needing to be announced, that whatever assumptions had been made the moment she walked in had not just been wrong, they had been completely misplaced, and there was no easy way back from that realization. The silence did not break this time, it deepened, settling into the kind of quiet that does not invite conversation but demands reflection, And for the first time since Claire had stepped onto the range, no one was looking at Jake for a reaction. No one was waiting for him to define what had just happened, because the evidence had already done that on its own. He stood there for a moment longer than usual, his posture still upright, his expression controlled, but the subtle shifts were impossible to miss now. The way his jaw tightened, the way his gaze moved not with confidence, but with calculation, searching for something, anything, that could restore the balance he had lost. "Where did you learn that?" he finally asked, the question slipping out before he could reshape it into something more casual, more controlled, and the tone betrayed him, not mocking, not dismissive, but genuinely uncertain. A few of the men exchanged glances, the question hanging in the air heavier than any joke had earlier, because it acknowledged something none of them had expected to confront. Claire did not answer immediately. She looked downrange once more, her eyes resting on the distant targets as if the conversation behind her carried less weight than the quiet space in front of her. And when she did speak, her voice remained calm, almost reflective. "A long time ago," she said, offering nothing more, nothing that could be measured or compared, nothing that gave them a way to place her back into a category they understood. Jake exhaled slowly, a small breath that carried more than he intended, and for a moment, he glanced at the others, as if hoping someone would step in, say something that would lighten the moment, turn it back into something familiar, but no one did. The group that had once leaned on his confidence now stood in a quiet line of uncertainty, each of them processing the same realization in their own way, that what they had witnessed was not luck, not coincidence, but something practiced, something earned, something they had completely failed to recognize. One of the younger men lowered his phone, no longer recording, his expression thoughtful rather than amused, while another shifted his stance, arms no longer crossed in judgment but resting at his sides, unsure of where to place them now. The hierarchy that had felt so clear earlier had dissolved without warning, leaving behind something far less comfortable, a space where assumptions no longer held and confidence had to be rebuilt from a different foundation. Jake stepped back from the bench, his movements slower now, less defined, as if he was recalibrating not just the moment, but himself, and when he spoke again, his voice had changed, not completely, but enough to be noticed. "You shoot competitively?" he asked, the words more respectful than he intended, though he did not try to correct them. Claire gave a small shake of her head, her expression unchanged. "Not anymore," she replied, and there was something in that answer, something quiet and final, that closed a door they had only just realized existed. The breeze picked up slightly, brushing across the range, lifting the edges of the paper targets in the distance, and for a moment, no one moved, no one spoke, because the moment no longer belonged to anyone in particular. It simply existed, heavy and undeniable, forcing each person there to confront the same truth in their own way. And Jake Carter, the man who had built his reputation on certainty, stood in the center of it, realizing that the easiest assumptions were often the most dangerous ones, especially when they were made about someone who never needed to prove anything in the first place. The moment lingered longer than anyone expected, stretching quietly across the range as the late afternoon light softened into a warmer glow, casting long shadows behind every figure standing there. And for the first time, no one seemed eager to fill the silence, because anything said too quickly would have sounded hollow against what had already been proven. Claire remained near the bench, her posture relaxed, her attention no longer fixed on the targets, but not entirely on the group either, as if she existed just slightly outside the need for validation that still held the others in place. Jake shifted again, this time not out of habit, but out of necessity, the kind that comes when someone realizes the ground beneath them is no longer as stable as it once felt. He glanced toward the targets once more, then back at Claire, his expression more measured now, less certain, and when he spoke, there was a restraint in his voice that had not been there before. "You said not anymore," he began, choosing his words carefully. "So what changed?" It was not a challenge this time, not even curiosity in the usual sense, but something closer to respect trying to find its footing in unfamiliar territory. A few of the men subtly leaned in, their earlier confidence replaced with quiet interest, not the kind that looks for weakness, but the kind that listens for understanding. Claire paused for a moment, her gaze drifting briefly toward the horizon beyond the targets. where the sky met the distant tree line, and for a second, something softer passed through her expression, not regret, not pride, just memory. Life, she said simply, the word carrying more weight than its simplicity suggested, and she let it rest there, not expanding, not explaining, because some things did not need to be unpacked in front of strangers to be understood. Jake nodded once, slowly, as if that answer, though brief, had shifted something in him, something that made his earlier behavior feel smaller in comparison. He looked around at the others, noticing for the first time that no one was laughing. No one was trying to recover the old rhythm of the group, and that realization settled heavier than anything else. One of the men cleared his throat quietly, then stepped forward just slightly, not enough to interrupt, but enough to acknowledge a change in the dynamic, his voice lower when he spoke. "That was impressive," he said, not to Jake, but to Claire, the words simple, direct, and genuine in a way that had not existed earlier. Another nodded in agreement, and though no one made a grand gesture, the collective shift was undeniable, the room no longer built on comparison, but on recognition. Jake exhaled again, this time slower, more controlled, and for a moment, he seemed to weigh something internally before stepping forward, closing the distance by just a step, not imposing, not dominant, just present. "I misjudged you," he said finally, the admission quiet but clear, carrying more significance than any apology could have, because it acknowledged not just the moment, but the assumption behind it. Claire met his gaze for the first time fully, her expression unchanged, not triumphant, not dismissive, simply steady, and she gave a small nod, accepting the words without needing to respond to them. The breeze moved again, softer now, carrying the faint rustle of paper downrange, and as the sun dipped lower, the sharp edges of the day began to blur into something calmer, something more grounded. No one suggested another shot. No one asked for proof, because what needed to be understood already had been, and in that quiet shift, something far more important than accuracy had been revealed, something about perception, about humility, about the cost of assuming you understand someone before you ever take the time to see them clearly. The light continued to fade, softening everything it touched, turning sharp edges into quiet outlines, and as the sun dipped closer to the horizon, the range no longer felt like a place of competition, but something quieter, something more reflective, as if the day itself had decided to slow down after everything that had unfolded. Claire stepped back from the bench, brushing a small trace of dust from her sleeve without urgency, her movements as composed as they had been from the beginning, unaffected by the shift in attention that now surrounded her. Around her, the group no longer held their earlier formation, the loose circle dissolving into something less defined, less certain, as each person adjusted not just their stance, but their perspective. One of the men moved toward the target retrieval system, pressing the control with a quiet click, and as the paper targets began to slide back along the line, the soft mechanical hum filled the space, drawing everyone's eyes forward again, not out of skepticism this time, but confirmation. The targets arrived slowly, the distance closing in a steady glide until the results were no longer abstract shapes far away but clear, undeniable marks in front of them, and no one needed to speak for the truth to settle in. Completely. Jake stepped closer, his gaze fixed on the paper, his earlier confidence now replaced with something far more grounded, something that did not rely on assumption or performance. He reached out slightly, not touching the target, but hovering near it as if proximity alone might offer some explanation. But there was none to find, only precision, clean and deliberate. Behind him, the others leaned in as well, not crowding, not competing for space, but sharing the moment in a way that felt different from before, quieter, more respectful, and one of them let out a soft breath, almost a laugh, though it carried no mockery this time, only recognition. "That is not luck," he said under his breath, not directed at anyone in particular, but the words carried, settling into the space where earlier assumptions had once lived. Jake straightened slowly, turning back toward Claire, his expression no longer guarded, no longer needing to prove anything, and for a moment, he simply looked at her, not as someone out of place, but as someone he had failed to understand. "You ever think about coming back to it?" he asked, the question quieter now, stripped of ego, carrying only genuine curiosity. Claire considered it for a brief second, her eyes drifting once more toward the open stretch of the range, the fading light, the stillness that had replaced the earlier noise, and there was no hesitation in her answer. "No," she said softly, and that single word carried a sense of closure that did not invite persuasion. Jake nodded, accepting it without question, and that acceptance, simple as it was, marked a change more significant than anything else that had happened that day. A few of the others began to gather their gear, movements slower, more thoughtful, the usual chatter absent, replaced with a quiet awareness that lingered beneath the surface. No one rushed to leave, but no one tried to extend the moment either, as if they understood that what had needed to happen had already reached its natural end. Claire picked up her things without ceremony, her presence as understated as when she arrived, and as she turned toward the exit, no one stopped her, no one called out. Because there was nothing left to challenge, nothing left to prove. And as she walked away, the range remained still for a moment longer, the group standing in that quiet space where assumptions had been replaced with something far more valuable, the simple understanding that the loudest confidence often knows the least, and the quietest presence can change everything without ever raising its voice. The sound of the door closing behind her was soft, almost unnoticeable against the open air, yet it marked the end of something far more significant than anyone there had expected when the afternoon began. Outside, the last light of the day stretched across the gravel lot, painting everything in a quiet amber glow, and Claire walked without hesitation, her pace steady, her posture unchanged, as if nothing about the past hour required reflection or validation. She did not look back. She did not need to. Inside the range, the silence remained, lingering even after she had gone, settling into the spaces between the men who now stood differently than they had before, their earlier confidence replaced with something quieter, something more aware. Jake remained near the bench for a moment longer than the others, his eyes drifting once more toward the targets now resting still at the line, their markings no longer distant, no longer abstract, but clear reminders of a moment that had shifted more than just a single afternoon. He reached for his gear slowly, not with the usual sharp efficiency, but with a measured calm, as if each movement carried a thought he had not considered before. One of the men spoke quietly behind him, not joking, not dismissive, simply stating what had become obvious. "You never really know who you are looking at," he said, and this time, no one laughed, because there was nothing left to challenge in that statement. Jake nodded once, almost to himself, the weight of that realization settling deeper than he would have expected, and for the first time in a long while, he did not feel the need to respond, to lead, to define the moment. He simply let it exist. Around him, the others began to pack up, their conversations returning slowly, but not to what they had been before, the tone lower, more thoughtful, as if each of them carried a piece of the same lesson in their own way. No one mentioned the earlier jokes. No one tried to recreate the energy that had filled the space before Claire arrived, because something about it no longer fit, no longer felt necessary. The range itself seemed quieter now, not because of the absence of sound, but because of the presence of understanding that had not been there before. As the last of the light faded and the evening settled in, Jake paused one final time, glancing toward the door she had walked through, not expecting her to return, not needing her to, but acknowledging, in his own way, that the moment had left something behind. Not embarrassment, not defeat, but clarity. And as he turned to leave, following the others into the cooling air of the evening, the lesson remained, unspoken but undeniable, that respect does not come from how loud you stand in a room, but from how quietly you are able to recognize when you were wrong, and that sometimes the most powerful presence is the one that never needed to announce itself at